Have you ever, like, just sat and thought about what makes us human? What makes us different, We share so much DNA with other animals, but then there's this whole thing about language. It's really kind of amazing when you think about it. And that's what we're going to deep dive into today. We're going to be looking at this gene called MOVA1. It might be one of the keys to, like, figuring out how humans developed spoken language.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating question. Scientists have been looking at this for ages, right? For a long time, the focus was on this other gene, FOXP2. We actually share a version of it with Neanderthals, our extinct cousins. But there's still a lot of debate about exactly what FOXP2 does. And then NOVA1 comes along and it kind of throws a wrench in things.
So before we get into all the NOVA1 stuff, can you maybe give us a little background? I know Neanderthals probably had, like, the physical structures to speak, but what else do we know about how language actually evolved in humans?
Well, it's not just about having the right vocal cords. You got to think about the brain, too. Like, imagine your DNA is this giant instruction manual for building your body. The brain is like the most complicated machine in there. And for language to work, you need really specific wiring in the brain, like very specific connections between neurons. That's where genes like NOVA1 come into play.
Oh, okay, I see. So NOVA1 is basically involved in building the parts of the brain that we need for language.
Exactly. Think about it like this. NOVA1 is the conductor. It makes sure that the right genes are expressed, at the right time for our brains to develop properly. And here's the really cool part. Humans have this totally unique version of NOVA1. It's just a tiny change in its code. But other animals, even Neanderthals, they don't have it.
Okay, now you really got my attention. Tell me more about this human version of NOVA1. What makes it so special?
Scientists call it the I197V variant. It's just a tiny change in the amino acids that make up the NOVA1 protein, but it seems to have had a huge impact. And you know how they figured this out? They did this super cool experiment with mice.
Mice? Wait, how can studying mice tell us anything about human language?
I know, right? I thought the same thing, but this is where it gets really wild. They used this gene editing tool called CRISPR to swap out the mouse version of NOVA1 with the human one. It's like taking a sentence in that instruction manual and changing just one word.
So they basically gave these mice a little bit of a human touch. What happened? Did it change them somehow?
They thought they might see some changes in the mice's brains or maybe how they moved, but that stuff stayed pretty much the same. What they did find, though, was totally unexpected.
Okay, I can't wait to hear this. What did they discover? What was different about these mice?
They found that the mice with the human NOVA1, they actually sounded different.
Wait a minute, are you serious? You're telling me that they could actually hear a difference in the way these mice squeaked?
Yep, it wasn't just, random noise either. Baby mice, they use these ultrasonic squeaks to talk to their moms, right? And scientists have figured out how to sort of categorize these squeaks. They call them letters based on how they sound.
Whoa, hold on. You're telling me mouse squeaks have letters? This is blowing my mind right now.
It's just a way for scientists to analyze these sounds, And what they found was that in the mice with the human NOVA1, the frequency and pattern of these letters, they changed, like they were speaking like a different dialect or something.
So even though their brains seemed normal, their way of communicating was totally different.
Exactly. It's like that human variant of NOVA1. It's affecting those neural pathways involved in vocal communication. They found similar things in the adult male mice, too, like their mating calls. More subtle changes, though.
So just to be clear, this isn't saying that NOVA1 is the language gene, right?
Oh, no. Language is way too complex for that. It'd be like saying you could explain a whole symphony by just looking at one note.
That makes sense. So what does all this tell us about NOVA1 and its role in language?
Well, it shows just how powerful even a tiny change in a single gene can be. This one little tweak in NOVA1, it might have had this huge ripple effect, like across generations, shading how we communicate today.
That's insane. It makes you wonder how many other little changes in our DNA could be responsible for all the stuff that makes us human. How do we know this human version of NOVA1 wasn't just a fluke? Like maybe it's just a random thing that doesn't actually mean anything.
That's a great question. So to rule that out, they looked at this gigantic database of human genomes, over 650,000 of them from all over the world.
650,000? That's like a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a lot. And out of all those people, there were only 6 that didn't have that human-specific I197V variant. And those 6 had the ancestral version, the one you see in other animals and Neanderthals.
Okay, so that pretty much confirms it, right? This variant is everywhere in modern humans. What about our extinct relatives? How do we know they didn't have it?
Well, they compared the genomes of modern humans with those of Neanderthals and Denisovans. And they found that our extinct relatives, they had the same NOVA1 as other animals. This I197V thing, it seems to be a human-only thing.
So then, when and where do we think this human variant of NOVA1 showed up?
Well, if you look at the big picture, it seems like the I197V variant probably popped up in an ancestral human population somewhere in Africa.
That makes sense. Africa is like the birthplace of humanity, right? But why do we think this specific variant spread so quickly?
Okay, remember that mouse experiment? It showed that even a tiny change in vocalization could be linked to this human variant of NOVA1. So imagine a group of early humans, right? It's a dangerous world. They're competing for food, trying not to get eaten, dealing with all this complicated social stuff.
Yeah, I bet communication was like super important for them.
Totally. Now imagine that some individuals are born with this new NOVA1 variant. They might be able to communicate way more effectively, like maybe they can warn each other about danger more clearly or coordinate hunting strategies better.
That's like having a superpower. It makes sense that this variant would spread like wildfire.
Exactly. If you live in a world where communication means survival, this variant would have been a game changer.
This is seriously incredible. We've gone from talking about one gene to this whole epic evolutionary journey, and this deep dive's just getting started. It's given me like a totally new way of thinking about how powerful genes are, how even the tiniest tweaks can make such a huge difference.
It really is remarkable. And the story of NOVA1 doesn't end there. We've talked about its role in, language evolution. But what about its implications for us today? Could this research help us understand and maybe even treat communication disorders?
Welcome back. It's amazing, right? To think one gene could have been so important in how we communicate as humans. It makes you think. But, besides the evolution stuff, I'm also curious about what all this NOVA1 research means for us now. You mentioned something about it helping us understand communication disorders. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. NOVA1 isn't just, some leftover thing from our evolutionary past. It's still working in our brains right now. It plays a really big role in how our neural networks develop and work, especially the ones involved in language and communication.
So if something's wrong with NOVA1, that could lead to, like, problems with speech or language.
Yeah, that's exactly what researchers are looking into. They're kind of going beyond that specific human variant we talked about. They're looking at all the different NOVA1 variations out there. Genes can have these little differences in their code, almost like typos in that instruction manual we were talking about earlier. And some of these variations, they might affect how well NOVA1 actually does its job.
So are scientists saying that these variations in NOVA1 could be linked to actual communication disorders?
It's still early, but there's more and more evidence that variations in NOVA1 could be a factor in things like developmental language disorder, where kids have trouble, learning to talk.
That makes a lot of sense. This research could be really helpful for parents who are worried about their child's development, right? Could it give them some answers? Maybe even lead to new ways to help?
I think that's the hope. If we can figure out exactly how specific variations in NOVA1 affect how kids learn language, it could help us diagnose things earlier and maybe even come with some more targeted therapies. Imagine being able to spot those kids who are at risk for language problems really early on and then give them the extra support they need.
Wow, that would be amazing. To be able to help kids like that to really make a difference in their lives. It's incredible that one gene, NOVA1, could have such a huge impact on our health and well-being.
It is, and it's not just about, speech disorders either. Remember, NOVA1 is important for how our brains develop as a whole. Scientists are also trying to figure out if variations in NOVA1 could be connected to other conditions, like nonverbal autism, where communication and social interaction are really affected.
Wow, so we're talking about potentially understanding a whole bunch of neurological conditions in a completely new way. And it all comes back to this one amazing gene.
It's possible, yeah. And that's what makes all this research so exciting. It's opening up all these new paths for us to explore, especially in areas where we've been looking for answers for a long time. It's like we're finally able to really see what's inside that room we've only been peeking into.
It really makes you appreciate how complex our brains are and how much we still don't know. As exciting as all this research is, I can't help but think about the ethical side of things too. We're talking about messing with genes here. Where's the line?
You're right. That's really important. Anytime we have a powerful scientific tool, especially one that lets us get right into the heart of life itself, we have to be very careful. The potential benefits are huge, but we can't forget about the risks either.
Yeah, I agree. It's a reminder that as science keeps moving forward, we always need to think about what's right and wrong.
Exactly. We have to make sure that all these amazing advances are used in a responsible way and that they benefit everyone.
Okay, so we've covered a lot, right? From how NOVA1 evolved to how it might affect our health, and we even talked about the ethics of it all. It's been a really amazing deep dive.
It has, hasn't it? And we've really only just scratched the surface. There's still so much to learn about this gene, about how it affects who we are as humans.
It's amazing to think about, right? This little change in just one gene might be linked to something as big as our ability to communicate, to share ideas, to create whole societies. It really makes you think about the power of evolution and how genes work.
Absolutely, it shows how much we still have to learn, and every time we discover something new, it just brings up even more questions. And that's what keeps science going.
It's like always uncovering new layers of a mystery. And with every layer, there's another even deeper mystery underneath. So for our listeners who are now totally hooked on NOVA1 and want to learn more, anything you would suggest checking out?
Oh, for sure. The original research paper is a great place to start. It was published in Nature Communications. It's called A Humanized NOVA1 Splicing Factor Alters Mouse Vocal Communications. It gets a little technical, but it's really cool to see the science behind it all.
Okay, that's for the science nerds out there. What about people who just want a simple explanation?
Well, there's a really good article from Rockefeller University. It's called Genetic Discovery Could Unlock the Mysterious Origin of Human Language. It does a great job explaining the research and what it all means.
Perfect. We'll put links to both of those in the show notes.
Great. And remember, this is just the beginning. We still have a lot to learn about where human language came from and how our brains work.
That's what keeps it interesting, right? Always learning, always exploring, always trying to figure things out.
Exact.
Well, it's probably time to wrap up our deep dive into NOVA1, but before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. If this one tiny change in a single gene could have such a massive impact on how we communicate, what other secrets are hiding in our DNA, just waiting to be discovered? What other paths could we have taken as a species if just one gene had been different?
Whoa. Yeah, that's a really powerful thought, isn't it? The idea that our very existence, our ability to talk, our place in the universe, it might all be shaped by these tiny little changes in our genes.
It is, and it makes you wonder what other connections between our genes and how we act are still out there waiting to be found.
And how those discoveries will change how we see ourselves and where we come from.
It's a journey that never really ends. Thanks for being with us on this deep dive into the amazing world of OVA1.
It's been great being here.
And to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that curiosity alive. The world of knowledge is huge, and there's always something new to learn. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into NOVA1. You know, it's wild to think we've spent this whole episode talking about just one gene, and there's still so much we don't know.
I know, right? It feels like we've only just started to explore NOVA1 and what it means for, well, everything. Human evolution, health, it's all connected.
Yeah, and one thing that I keep thinking about is how almost everyone on Earth has this I197V variant, like pretty much every single human. That really says something about how important this little tweak must have been back in the day.
For sure. It had to have given our ancestors a real leg up, right? Helping them survive and pass it on to their kids. And that advantage probably came from being able to communicate better, sharing info, making stronger connections with each other.
I love that. A tiny change in our DNA that led to more complex communication, which, basically built human society. It's amazing. But are there other genes that scientists are looking at when it comes to language?
Absolutely. NOVA1 is just one piece of a much bigger picture. There are probably tons of other genes involved. Each one plays a role in how our brains develop, how our vocal cords work, all those complicated networks that let us form words and sentences and ultimately thoughts.
So it's not about finding the language gene. It's about understanding how all these genes work together, like an orchestra.
Exactly. It's about figuring out the whole symphony, how genes, environment, culture, how it all comes together to create this amazing ability to communicate.
Well, I think it's time to wrap up our NOVA1 deep dive. But before we do, I want to thank you for, taking us on this journey. It's been really eye-opening, learning about science, evolution, what it means to be human.
My pleasure. It's always fun to talk about this stuff.
And to all our listeners, never stop asking questions. Never stop being curious about the world. Who knows what incredible things we'll discover next. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. See you next time.